Hello, everybody. So this video is a very interesting one. We're gonna show you Databricks on Databricks. So David, what does it mean exactly?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to actually share some slides and talk about it. But so, hey, yeah, the idea is in my job as a solutions architect at Databricks, we have a new tool that we've built that basically makes my job easier using Gen AI. So a lot of times in my job, it's sort of, hey, can you really do all the things you're claiming you can do in Databricks? And that's exactly what I'm going to show you is how, yes, we've used Databricks on Databricks to build tools that make our employees more efficient. Yeah.
So we're talking about an internal tool we built for Databricks using Databricks technology.
Yes,
Excellent.
exactly. Databricks on Databricks.
Amazing. Let's go through.
So let me go through this. So hey, yeah, hey, thanks for having me talk about this. I'm going to talk about Databricks on Databricks. I'll talk about what that means. We kind of just alluded to that. Um, there's this field AI assistant that I'm going to go through. I'll tell you guys what that's all about. I work in the field, and I'm going to show you how there's this assistant that we built. It's a Gen AI tool that basically makes my work flow easier and more efficient during the day. I'll show you guys what that looks like. Somebody once told me when you're presenting a topic, kind of start with the headline, start with the end state, and then kind of work backwards. So here's the end state, here's the headline. This is a screenshot of me in Salesforce about to do some account investigations, right? So in my job, I work with multiple accounts, and Salesforce is our CRM tool that we use, just tracking the accounts and all that stuff. Something to think about is this isn't specific to Salesforce. So the stuff I'm going to show you, if you're thinking to yourself, well, hey, I don't use Salesforce, that's okay, because this actually isn't about Salesforce. What this is about, let me turn on my little laser pointer, because I love my laser pointer. This little icon down here, this little Databricks icon. Like a month ago, that wasn't there. And now if I click on that icon, I can start asking questions about my customers rather than say, trying to find it myself. I can have my little AI bot, my little agent, my little assistant help me find information about the customers. So this is a screenshot. So I'm going to actually break away real fast and show you what does this actually look like? And just a second, real fast. I seem to have lost my Salesforce, but that's okay. I can get it back real fast. So I'm going to go into Salesforce. This is like something I do dozens of times a day. And I'm going to go into my accounts. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to look at this demo account. And so if I want to start asking questions, of course, I can go through Salesforce and I can start poking around here and finding out information about my customer. Or, hey, now I've got this cool little tool. I can open up, and I think we called this Mo. I'm not really sure why, but anyways, this is the field AI assistant that was built on Databricks. And so now when I go into Salesforce, I can start asking questions about my account. There's some prefab stuff that I do on a regular basis that just, it's like a repetitive thing. I'm constantly looking at certain things. And so maybe that's going to make my job faster to say, hey, rather than poke around and find these things I look at all the time, maybe I can just have my little assistant go and pull this stuff for me. I can also go down here. And so what's happening right now is there's this, I sent a request to an LLM, a Gen AI agent, and said, hey, I want to see quarter over quarter account growth. And it spit this back. And so this is how the account has increased its usage over time within Databricks. And I can start asking more questions here. But before I go too far into like using this tool, what I want to actually do is get into the concept and how you can apply it to in your situation, because it doesn't matter if you use Salesforce. This isn't specific to Salesforce. This is specific to the idea of having a tool that makes your employees more efficient to sort of do the things that they regularly do in a more automated, easier way using something like this, assistant, this agent, this chatbot type experience. I do want to tell you, like, whenever people talk about Gen AI, I feel like as you see this, and people probably have a little bit of fatigue. Oh, wait, seriously? You're just going to show me
Another
another
chatbot.
another chatbot? Are
Yeah.
you kidding? Why are you showing me another chatbot? So there's some things about this that are different, and that's what I want to go through. This isn't like your vanilla chatbot. This is sort of an evolution of sort of sophistication, and I want to talk about that. So to get that, let me kind of go back into some sort of conceptual information from like a slides perspective. And don't worry, I'm not going to bore you too much with slides. I'm gonna I'm going to show you a demo of how to actually build this stuff in Databricks. But I want to talk through the concept a little bit. There's a blog on this, and I'm sure we can probably provide a link to the blog
Yep.
afterwards. So there's a blog that gets into more detail, and I want to give credit where credit is due. The only reason why I can present anything on this topic is because I picked the minds of the people that actually built this. I of course I'm standing on the shoulder of giants as always, but I didn't build this tool myself. But I've learned quite a bit about what we've done and kind of talking to you guys about that today. So, anyways, you guys can look at the blog at some point. Okay, so when our team was building this, I think the things that were top of mind would probably similar what would be the top of mind of anybody who's wanting to build a tool like this. Productivity of employees, having a good user experience, and oh, by the way, governance and security. So there's a lot of data behind the scenes that's being accessed. Let's make sure the right people are accessing the right data, et cetera. So, and then of course, at Databricks, like with all our customers as well, we've got a data-driven culture. We want to have some fact-based decision making. So we want to have a tool that gives us a data-driven experience. The one thing that's actually not on the slide that I would want to emphasize would be like accuracy and reliability. Maybe that's part of the user experience, but whenever I ask a question to a chatbot, one of the common things people have issues with is whenever it spits back garbage. We'll talk a little bit about that, how we want to make sure there's different ways to focus on the accuracy of this. So we'll talk about that. I already showed you a real quick sort of demo. I'm going to come back and show you more, but like what is this field AI assistant? Again, you can think about this assistant as being relative to any employee in any job function. It doesn't have to be like a solutions architect at Databricks using Salesforce. It could be, your typical, all kinds of use cases, but it could be somebody in HR who's wanting to analyze information about employees or have quick access to information about employee data. And it could be somebody in customer service who's, receiving calls, whatever. So all kinds of different examples and applications. It's just, for us here, this example is, hey, let's make people like David a little bit more efficient at their job. Okay, so now I'm going to start getting a little bit busier with the slides and talking a little bit more about why did we do this? How did we do this? What exactly did we do? Let's be a little bit of easing you into maybe thinking about an architecture, a reference architecture, what this actually looks like. So why I go into Salesforce and I do this kind of stuff all the time, summarization, content creation. I try to do that myself, performing actions on the data. Well, now I'm going to have an agent, an assistant, a bot that does this stuff for me. That doesn't sound really new. You're thinking, oh, that's just the same old, same old. Where things get different here, one of the things I want to highlight is these agents are not just smart LLMs answering questions. These are LLMs that are being given access to tools that are going to allow them to answer questions that they wouldn't be able to answer otherwise. And in the example that we've got in this field AI assistant, the tools that they're getting access to is Python functions, SQL queries. So think about it like this: it's like you ask a question to an LLM, and the typical situation is the LLM brain has billions of parameters that allow it to spit back an answer. And then now it's like, well, what if I'm asking it questions that it has to go find the answer? I'm going to give it tools that allow it to go find the answer. And then there's other things in the how, like
So David,
evaluate.
also
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
on that point, it's also a way to bring some business specific context into this now agent, which
Yes.
we didn't have access to the functions or the tools. It would just spit up generic, irrelevant to my business answers.
Yes. Great point. Exactly. Yeah, you're right. Yep. That context and that understanding of sort of your business is definitely a key part of this. And I'll show you an example of that, of how,
Amazing.
with the difference between the two scenarios where it has the context and it doesn't have the context. It has the tools and doesn't have the tools. So I'll show you that. Another thing I want to highlight here is this idea of LLMs as a judge. I want to talk about that a whole lot, but what I want to say within Databricks, one of the things that we have embedded in this application, as well as we would recommend for any of our customers, is one of the common things is, well, how do you make sure that you're not getting back some bad answers? It's a really interesting approach that maybe some people have heard of, is the idea that, hey, if an LLM is giving you back an answer, you can have other LLMs that are specifically tuned for basically judging those answers. An LLM that is specifically tuned for identifying when things aren't grounded in truthful data, or suffering from hallucinations, et cetera. So that's kind of a pretty thing. It just gives you more confidence in the result, embedding this idea as LLMs judging the LLM's answers. The other thing I'll say is with any project, this isn't new, it's iterative, right? I'm going to show you how you can prototype this quickly and then kind of show you how you could iterate through it and then ultimately deploy it kind of all with a UI as well as a coding approach. And then the what, this is where things to me are really interesting in terms of how this tool adds value to my job is even though that little icon I showed you, that little button that I press is in Salesforce, this really has nothing to do with Salesforce. It's just that I use Salesforce a lot and people like me use Salesforce. And so that's kind of a natural place to put the interface to this bot or this agent or this assistant. But the data that this agent is able to go after to give me my answers is all over the place. It's, structured data in a database, it's unstructured data in docs, it's data in Salesforce, it's et cetera. So the data can be all over the place. And you can imagine this list I got 5 sources here. This list could be longer, it could be shorter, kind of all depends on your situation. But obviously, the more data it gets access to, the smarter it is and better answers it can provide.
Very good point here is that this bot, while it sits on Salesforce, access all the data that are available in my business, irrelevant to Salesforce or where the end user app sits. So very interesting.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Because if you think about it, if I'm in Salesforce doing my account analysis and I suddenly have to go out and query some database, that's inefficient, right?
Yeah,
So it's the idea is that let's bring it all in one spot and make it
very
easier to do. Yeah. Now, as far as the Databricks stuff, I'm going to kind of show you some of the Databricks stuff. But I guess the takeaway from this slide is basically every aspect of the platform was used to build it and deploy it, right? So everything from ingesting and curating and all the typical Gen AI stuff is done. But then we've got things like the serving component within Databricks, having LLMs as judges, tracing ability, governance. So I'm not going to go into super detail here, but I'll just say I'll show you several aspects of the platform that are used here. I'm not going to show a whole bunch of slides. I'm going to be getting to the demo here pretty quickly, but conceptually, one of the things that I think is interesting to think about is, I don't know, what was it, a couple of years ago, all of our minds were blown when, we were shown something like ChatGPT and what it could do. And it was really mind blowing to say, hey, I can ask questions to this Gen AI application and it can shoot back some really impressive answers. But I think what we all learned early in that experience after having our minds blown was there were some pretty severe limitations to what you could do with your typical Gen AI tool. And so an example of that would be like having context for your business, right? So you kind of alluded to this, Maria, earlier, is the idea of there's this concept called RAG or an approach called RAG, retrieval augmented generation. And so the idea there is that people start talking about prompt engineering as a way to get better answers back from your LLM. Like the more information you give it, the better answer you'll get back. The way I think about RAG is we have this process where we can basically automate some really sophisticated prompt engineering. It's automated, you don't have to do it. It goes and pulls information from your data, from your context about your business, and includes that in the query, and you get better answers. Well, even that's limited. And to me, one of the biggest thing that's limited about at this stage of the evolution of sophistication is what happens when you start asking LLMs questions that don't have to do with text.
Hmm.
Like I can throw text at the LLM and it can impress me by throwing text back. What happens when I ask it to do math? What happens when I ask it to give me summaries of data? At that point, it starts falling apart. And then that's where we're at with this demo today is how do we solve that? And the way we solve that is giving the LLM access to tools. So, hey, if I ask you a question, maybe you're going to do a great job just using your big LLM brain, but maybe you're not, and you're going to have to go run a query for me against my database in order to answer my question. I want you, LLM, to be smart enough to do that and know what data and what tools to use, et cetera. And that's what I'm going to show you today is giving these agents access to these tools, make them way more powerful.
One
Because
point here is, sorry, Lara, that one of these tools that we just described actually can be a RAG layer, so a vector search. So in your agent with multiple tools and sources, actually we combine the RAG layer plus all the structured access to structured data with queries.
Yes, right.
I was
Exactly.
going to say exactly the same.
Oh, Same mind.
Yeah, that yeah, it's very interesting that people were starting experimenting with RAG, and that now with agent you get like the freedom to choose whatever tool is best for the task at hand, so that you can build.
Yeah, exactly. So if you think about extending this from agents calling tools, and this you can do this next step today. So this is like this the field AI assistant we're talking about today, this version 1.0 of this assistant that I can use is agents calling tools. Something else you can do if you want to kind of take it to the next level of sophistication is having agents calling other agents. What I mean by that is LLMs talking to each other. And so what does that mean? So if you think about like, hey, I've asked a question to LLM and it decides it needs to go run a SQL query, well, that's cool and that's powerful and that adds value. But it might be that I've actually got multiple LLMs that are fine-tuned for very specific topics. And I've got like this router LLM that I'm asking my questions to, and it's got all these other LLMs that it can go ask questions. I'll give you like I guess an analogy. Like imagine that you're a scientist working in a lab and your peers all have different specialties. So like I'm a geneticist, let's say, Maria is a microbiologist. Laura is an astrophysicist. We all work in the same lab, and I want to build a tool that serves all of us equally well. And I asked, so I'm asking a question about genetics, and Laura's asking a question about astrophysics. We want a tool that does an equally good job of answering those questions. There, really, if you think about it, like the monster LLM that knows everything about everything at a PhD level doesn't really exist, and it doesn't need to. What if I have an LLM that's specifically tuned for answering questions about genetics and an LLM that's specifically tuned for answering questions about astrophysics? This is just an example. And the idea being is that, well, now I've got one router LLM that's smart enough just to know, hey, you asked me a question, I'm going to go ask this other LLM. And that's kind of the next evolution of sophistication where this is going to go. And it can go right now today. Like this capability is there. It's just it is sort of an evolution up the curve of sophistication.
So, David, one thought here that came to my mind as you were discussing this. So, what is the point then of the orchestrator LLM? So, in my mind, we can have a fine tuned LLM for department A, fine tuned LLM for department B. But the reasoning of having this orchestrator LLM is that then you can have a unified application that you can release to all the departments. So, you support one application, one entry that people can hit, like one entry to the app, that
Yes.
the app should be clever enough to propagate it to the right fine-tuned LLM. So instead of having one LLM for each department and each department should know that it has to go and hit LLM A for this question, you just launch one business-wide app that should be clever enough to propagate the query to the right person or LLM.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's exactly the benefit is exactly that, right? I don't need to know which LLM to hit, right? The
Yes,
system kind of knows. Yeah. And the other
exactly.
thing I would say, and I think you kind of alluded to this in what you said, is there is actually an efficiency here and a cost savings because if I went down the path of trying to have one monster LLM that knows everything about everything at a PhD level, maybe I would get there someday with my 100 trillion parameter model or something. I don't know, but that's going to be a beast and it's going to be expensive and it's going to and then the idea is like these little specialized LLMs can actually be relatively small and relatively cheap and be really powerful. So yeah, that's part of it too.
Yep.
One thing maybe that we should highlight as well, because I got this question from customers. Uh, we talk a lot about our agent framework at Databricks, and I think there is confusion sometimes around all the AI orchestration frameworks that we have, for example, LangChain, LangGraph, AutoGen, etc. Just to clarify, everything is supported on Databricks, so you can orchestrate the way you want, and what we offer is the ability to build an agent with whatever orchestration framework you want. And then, especially as you mentioned, David, the ability to evaluate how well it's performing and then iterate very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. What I'm going to show you as far as like demoing how to build this is it's not some proprietary, approach. To your point, you can definitely craft sort of the inner workings to use the tools that you want. And so yeah, this is basically us providing a framework. Um, that allows you to build this. It's not us like having sort of a proprietary product that you're forced to use. You have a lot of ability to use the open source tools that you want to sort of fold in. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really a wrapper on a deployment framework, right? So how do you serve that on Databricks given any open source framework around?
Exactly.
Cool.
So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, and it's kind of like probably the second to last slide I think I'm going to actually cover. But I just want to, and this kind of goes to exactly the point you were talking about, is the idea of having this ability to, how do you, what kind of tools do you use, and the flexibility around the types of tools that you can use. So if you imagine over here, here's me with my blue hair and my bun asking a question to the agent. What's actually happening behind the scenes? There's kind of two processes. Like, how do we build this? And then what actually happens after it's built, right? And there's a couple of things I want to highlight here. And so kind of one would be, yeah, there's a lot of flexibility. So if I think about, you mentioned, I called it like a router LLM, you call it like an orchestrator LLM. If you think about like this agent that you're asking the question to, it could be a variety. It could be different options as to what that agent is. It could be a commercial product. It could be an open source LLM. It could be your own custom LLM. It kind of all depends on, and you can test things out and see, like what kind of tools did we use? What kind of tools you use? And you can swap them out relatively easy with our gateway. So anyway, so yeah, you got options here. What happens when you ask that question? You got that orchestrator agent now is going to start figuring out what to do with your question. And there's different options. It's going to figure out, hey, can I just do like a RAG approach, vector search, use my own brain with some vector search to give an answer? Do I need to call another agent? Do I need to query a table with some tools? I'm not going to get into like too much of the details around this slide for the sake of time, but there is a lot of flexibility in terms of how you design this and how you swap things out. And there's a lot of, what I'm going to show you is basically how we can make it easier for you to get started in terms of this, so you're not coding it from scratch. But one thing I do want to highlight here is this AI playground. I'm going to show you how you can, and how we did and we do use this quote playground to actually build a prototype and then start taking it from a prototype into something you could move to production. I'll show you how that adds some value in sort of that prototyping ability. I do want to say before I get into demo that I'm kind of making it out like this is nothing but awesome and super easy. And the reality is there's definitely challenges. I'm not going to read this slide verbatim, but I mean, hey, how long ago was it that we all had somebody tell us garbage in, garbage out, right? How long ago was it that we heard that? Guess what? That hasn't changed. If your data is garbage and you ask an LLM question and it looks at your data, it's going to give you a garbage answer. So there's definitely challenges that have to be overcome, like you do with any project. And so I don't want to make it out like this is just like a no-brainer. There's definitely some challenges along the way, but we have some tools and functionality and expertise that can help you kind of work through these. I did want to go into demo mode. You ladies are okay if I switch over to that?
Yeah, sure. Let's go for it.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to like just set the stage for how I'm going to ask an LLM a question. And the only way it's going to give me the answer I want is by looking at my data. So I'm going to ask a really smart LLM a pretty basic question, but the only way it's going to get it right is if it knows how to look at my data. And so I want to give you a little context. Well, what is my data? In this example, I've got some data that has information about my customers. Like each customer I know, the geography they're in. I've got some sort of demographic label. I've got all kinds of information about my customer. Details don't really matter. The point being is that when I go ask a question, the only way that I'm going to get the answer I want is if the LLM is smart enough to know it needs to go look at my data. So let me hop over to the Databricks playground. So I went over here and I went to the Databricks playground. And should I zoom in, or is this okay? Is this a good?
Yes.
Is this good?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm in the playground. There's a lot of things I can do in the playground. When I first started using the playground, one of the things I would do is I would just start comparing models. So like, here's a model here, the Llama 3.3 70 billion instruct model. If that doesn't mean anything to you, that's okay. But it's an open source model that was released by Meta. It's really powerful, and these Llama models are really great because they're open source. So it's not proprietary. You can use it. You can use it within Databricks. And so I'm going to go ahead and use this model. I like it, and I'm gonna ask it a question. But there's all kinds of things I could show you. I could start adding more models. and comparing different models to each other. I could start doing prompt engineering. There's all kinds of things I do in the playground. I got some system settings I can play with. I'm not going to worry about all that stuff. I'm just going to ask a question, and this is kind of like a loaded question because I know it's not going to get the right answer. I'm going to say, which demographic, and think about this question in the context of the data that I just gave you a glimpse into. Which demographic group in Los Angeles has the highest, like, type average churn rate? So I'm going to ask this question, and it says, hey, unfortunately, I couldn't find a definitive source, but I'm going to go ahead and give you some information about churn and demographic groups and stuff. I'm not going to read through that. By the way, it was really impressive how fast it gave me this answer. But
Yeah.
what wasn't impressive was that it really had nothing to do with what I was asking. Like, it was basically, this model was trained off of a bunch of publicly available data, and it gave me an answer that was based off of a bunch of publicly available data. I actually don't want that. I want an answer based off of my data. How complicated would it be to start programming how to get this thing to look at my data? Hey, guess what? I don't need to actually program that. I'm going to click this drop down and I'm going to add a tool. Now, before I add the tool, let me show you the tool that I'm going to add just real fast. I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to show you a function that I registered in Unity Catalog. And it's, I don't know, maybe the details about this aren't really super important. And if you're not a SQL coder, it's okay. But I wrote this SQL function, and what this SQL function is doing, in short, you don't have to worry about the details, is it's going to produce some summary statistics for a particular column, and it's going to look at a particular geographic area, and it's going to summarize things by demographic groups. And this function does have some flexibility. It's going to allow me to ask questions about different summary statistics. It's going to allow me to ask questions about maybe different columns or variables in my data. It's going to give me some flexibility. It is a single function. It's not going to give me full flexibility of everything I'd ever want to answer. But hey, guess what? It's actually going to go a long way towards giving that LLM the ability to answer the question the way that is going to make more sense to me. So I'm going to add a tool. I'm going to give this LLM access to this tool. The only thing that's changed here is it's the same LLM, same brain, only now I've given it a tool. Hey, LLM, here's a tool you can use if you decide you want to. And now I'm going to basically just say, let's just regenerate that same, let's just ask the same question.
And just adding
And
here
now,
that here you selected the Llama 370B instruct, but you could select any other LLM of your choosing on Databricks that includes what we call external models. So for example, OpenAI, etc. So you don't have to use this particular LLM.
great point. You're exactly right. I could select a different open source model. I could select a proprietary, a commercial model like OpenAI. I can use it here as well, as long as I have, like, an API key to connect to it and ping it. And I can have my own custom model that I've built or fine-tuned or pre-trained. So yeah, exactly. Great point. Yep, for
The
sure.
only requirement is to have tools calling capability.
Yes, that's a good point. So yeah, if I click this drop down, one of the things that is not all of these models have tools enabled. See this little icon? It looks like a person with a plus next to their head. I'm not sure what that's about, but that little icon basically says tools are enabled. So yeah, good point. If I were to pick this Mistral 8X7B Instruct, it's a good model for a lot of things. Oh, by the way, sad news here, I couldn't use this if I wanted to do this whole adding a tool. So great point. Yeah, great point. So it's like revisiting this question, is this LLM actually said, hey, you know what? I'm going to use this tool that you just gave me to ask this question, to answer this question. So it went and it used that tool. It returned a table of summary stats for Los Angeles. And then it looked at that table and it answered my question. The demographic group in Los Angeles with the highest average churn rate is the Simple Pleasures with a churn rate of 0.636. And if I were to peruse this data, I would see, yeah, that's actually the right answer. Now, whenever somebody showed me something like this, the first thing I thought was like, well, wait a second, like, how many tools would I have to add? The cool thing is you don't have to add a whole bunch of tools for this thing to actually start getting really smart, because these tools can be fairly flexible. But well, I was gonna say, if I ask it a totally different question, like what is the capital of New York, it knows it doesn't need to use a tool for that. It's already got the answer sort of in its brain, right? But the idea being is that imagine that I use this playground to, like you said before, maybe I'm trying in different models, different LLMs. I'm adding in additional tools. I'm tweaking my tools. And let's say that I've gone through the process of sort of figuring out how to structure this agentic system in a way that gives me answers that I feel good about. I'm kind of prototyping here. How do I go from prototyping here to actually deploying this for real? Look, there's a little export button here. What does this export button do? Now, this might be a little bit intimidating for the people who aren't necessarily like coding this type of stuff. But when I hit that export button, what it did was it basically gave me the code that I would need to deploy this agentic system that I just designed in the playground, like for real, meaning like I specified my orchestrator LM, I specified several tools, maybe I changed some settings and whatnot. And then now I can export this, and this gives me a real fast track towards deploying this, implementing this, and productionizing it, having this ability to generate this code for me without me having to sort of like manually figure out how to code all this stuff up. Okay, let's go back here and let's ask this assistant maybe a couple more questions. So the point that I want to make here is that that tool that I just showed you was looking at one particular function that looked at one particular set of data. The reality is that this tool, this field assistant, this field AI assistant, this has lots of tools and several data sources. And so it allows me to ask a variety of different kinds of questions. So like here, you can imagine there was a tool that maybe queried a customer database to produce this, but I can ask very different types of questions, like summarize recent interactions with this account. So very different kind of question. Like this isn't going to be necessarily some kind of SQL query hitting a database. This is a very different kind of question. The agent needs to be smart enough, and it is, to know, well, now I need to go to a different source. I need to go hit different data. Maybe I'm probably hitting some unstructured data now.
You're probably going through the notes on the use case.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's going through notes. It's going through contact history. Now this is actually a demo account. So I mean, it's sort of like this is like there's no significant activity the last time it is because it's a demo account. But if it's a real account, it would go and say, hey, here's the emails, here's the meetings, here's et cetera. So I can ask it very different kinds of questions. The other thing I want to point out would be, what if I ask it something like, who is the VP? And this will be the last question I asked him. You'd like to talk about this. Very different question. Now, probably ultimately to answer this is just got to be smart enough to go and look in Salesforce and say, what it's basically saying is based on the account details, we don't have a contact for the VP of marketing. So the point I want to make here is not to like poke holes in the tool, to just basically say that it's not that this thing is going to know the answer to every single question, because it kind of depends on what data that you've got access to. So in this example, there's no contact in Salesforce for the VP of marketing. So it just says, hey, I don't know who the VP of marketing is. You're going to have to figure that out. So here's the details we have. And, here's ask these people. They should know. The solutions architect or the account executive should know the answer to the question. I don't know it because it's not in the data. So anyways, to kind of summarize, so we got Databricks. On Databricks, we're using Databricks to build an application that then we deploy to our employees to be able to make their workflow more productive. I imagine that we're going to see more tools like this popping up around our internal employee landscape in terms of different places with different specialties to use in different areas. Think about it, there might come a day where I'm never actually clicking around. Might come a day where the only way I get information might be interfacing with agents like this. So anyways, I'll pause there and say, let's maybe talk about it.
Whatever you showed in the playground is the baseline. So there was an LLM that was accepting one tool. Now, to connect the dots to what we have here again, we have an LLM, but this can access many different tools, maybe hit some other APIs of different SaaS services probably as well, to come into the format of these that can answer many different questions and be a more useful tool than answering one specific query, right?
Yeah, right. That's a great way to put it. That's the way I think of it. Yep.
And a question, do you know how they manage to get from like the state where we register, the agent, etc., to integrating it in Salesforce?
Yeah, so if you think about one of the things I didn't cover is there's the idea of having an app, right? So this you can think about this as like an app, and you can embed the app sort of like really wherever you want. We chose to embed the app in Salesforce. So I think my simplistic answer to the question is that this is an app is like just this interface that I built that provides me access to this agentic system. So it's like basically going to be doing API calls from the app into a model serving endpoint, LLM.
Yes, I believe there is a model serving endpoint behind the scenes, and I guess Salesforce is allowing to integrate some of your tools. So
Yes.
Salesforce is providing this chat UI that behind the scenes really hits our endpoint.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. Yeah. So there's a Databricks model serving endpoint that's actually sort of the engine that's running things, right? So it's like, hey, I submit a query. That query needs to make its way to that LLM. So there's like an app, API hits a model serving endpoint. There you go. And then there's some, Databricks compute that's processing and spitting back an answer. And yeah, so but in essence, it is an app that can access these model serving endpoints, and that's a really common motion we're seeing with a lot of our customers now building. And we actually have Databricks apps, right? So you can actually we've got some functionality that makes deploying those apps easier and building and designing those apps. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, David.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Well, thanks.